Let's go from bad to worse. From the peak of Japan to the wilderness of Arkansas, to the world's highest mountain. These are the stories of illegal climbs and bad decisions that cost people their lives. As always, viewer discretion is advised. Mount Fuji, Japan's most iconic peak. Standing at 13,000 feet, this mountain is internationally recognized for its beauty and tranquility, and is a popular destination for both pilgrims and adventurers alike. The air is crisp, the sky is clear, and you're filled with excitement for the climb ahead. But it's June, and you're outside the official climbing season. Despite the warnings, you decide to take on the challenge. This decision sets the stage for an unexpected adventure, with a tragic outcome. Fuji is usually climbed during the official season from early July to mid-September, when the weather is more predictable and the trails are safer. But in June, the conditions can be more uncertain and the paths less traveled. As you start your climb, the beauty of the surrounding nature is overwhelming. The towering trees, the distant sound of birds, and the occasional rustle of the wind create a serene atmosphere. But it's not all roses. The peace is mixed with a sense of risk. The trails are slippery. Patches of snow are still melting, and the weather can change quickly. Climbing Mount Fuji in these conditions means you need to be extra careful with every step. The paths that are usually bustling with climbers are now quiet and solitary. I guess this is a bonus if you enjoy quiet hikes, but also increases the danger of the journey. You're aware that help is further away if something goes wrong, and the mountain's beauty comes with a stark reminder of its power. One Friday in June 2024, Eriko Takahashi, a 53-year-old mountain climber from Tokyo, told his family he was heading out to climb Mount Fuji. Now Eriko knew what climbing Mount Fuji entailed. He had probably spent weeks preparing for this climb, gathering all the necessary gear to ensure his safety. This preparation probably included special mountaineering boots designed to handle slippery trails, multiple layers of thermal clothing to combat the cold, and a high-quality waterproof jacket to protect against unexpected rain or snowfall. Additionally, he brought along a reliable GPS device, a compass for navigation, and a detailed map of the mountain's trails. Knowing the risks of climbing alone, especially out of the official season, he informed his family about his intended route and the time he expected to return. So far, so good. Eriko is doing better than a lot of other climbers whose stories we've covered. And off he went. Eriko's initial climb to the summit was very successful. Climbing steadily, he made good time and reached the summit the very next day. He even sent a photo near the top to his family, assuring them that he was safe and made the summit. Eriko, filled with the joy of climbing Mount Fuji alone, and from the stunning views from the mountain, probably took some time to enjoy the quiet and the view. He might have sat down on a crater ledge to eat a snack he brought, looking out over the wide landscape. We say probably, because the last sign from Eriko was the photo he had sent from the summit. What happened next was both surprising and shocking. Speaking of shocking, have you ever Googled yourself? If you're like me, you have at least once in your life, and what you find is wildly uncomfortable. Your name, email, phone number, and personal information is out there for absolutely anyone to buy for the right price. You've definitely gotten spam calls before. Talk about annoying. Where do you think your information came from? Online. It's great to live in an amazing world where you can find anything you want in just a few seconds, but it's also very unsettling. Data brokers sell your information to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, email, home address, health records, your relatives, it's all out there. It's not just data brokers exposing our information. Sometimes it's companies we're supposed to trust. Recently, AT&T revealed that over 73 million customer records, both existing and former customers, were released on the dark web. They recommend those affected use strong passwords, monitor account activity, and consider credit freezes or fraud alerts from credit bureaus. That's why I've been using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. Cleaning up my information, not only helps reduce the amount of spam I get, but it protects me from hackers who could use this information to help them access my social media accounts, bank accounts, or other sensitive information. Well, Aura does all this for me. And best of all, I don't have to download several different apps just because a company couldn't keep my data secure. If my info was compromised in the AT&T data breach, I wouldn't worry, because Aura is always on, always doing the hard work of keeping me safe. I'm not leaving myself and my family vulnerable to data breaches, and if you don't want to either, you can go to https://aura.com/extreme edge and try your first 2 weeks for free. Also linked below in the description. Back to Eriko's shocking story. Like we mentioned, he had carried a GPS beacon for safety. So when he didn't come home the day after that and didn't respond to any messages, his family reported him missing. The police in the local prefecture, where some of the trails to the summit begin, started searching for Eriko, using his GPS beacon signal as a starting point. The rescue team, which was made up of several experienced mountain climbers, assembled at the trail's base early in the morning, hoping to rescue him alive. Despite it being summer, the upper parts of the mountain were still covered in snow, and this made the climb tricky and dangerous. The rescuers brought gear like crampons for walking on ice and ice axes to help them navigate safely. As the rescuers carefully followed the beacon signal up the mountains, they faced tough conditions. Thick fog made it hard to see on higher elevations of the mountain, and the cold wind made it even more challenging. Sharp gusts of winds blew through as they passed, cutting through their gear and chilling them as they moved. As the rescue team made it to the top of Mount Fuji, they were stunned to find not only Eriko's lifeless body, but the bodies of 2 other climbers. Imagine being called to rescue one person, but then finding 2 other people. You had no idea were up there and had also mysteriously died. Each body was found in a different place near the top of the mountain. All 3 climbers had made it to the summit, but then somehow passed away. As you can imagine, the sight was very somber. Each climber was found completely alone. So what happened to these 3 hikers mysteriously found dead? The initial examination by the medical team, brought in by helicopter, suggested that all 3 of them had died from a heart attack. At high altitudes like those found on Mount Fuji, the air is much thinner, which means it contains less oxygen. When the body doesn't get enough oxygen, it can undergo what's known as hypoxia. This condition stresses the body, particularly the heart, which must work harder to deliver oxygen to the brain and other vital organs. In such environments, the heart is under constant strain. This strain is made even worse by cold temperatures, which can cause blood vessels to narrow, further restricting blood flow and oxygen delivery. The climbers, already exerting themselves physically to reach the summit, would have been pushing their heart and cardiovascular systems to the limit. This excessive strain can lead to heart complications and increase the risk of heart attacks. As if that isn't bad enough, high-altitude climbing exposes individuals to the risk of altitude sickness, something that can result in more severe conditions like high-altitude pulmonary edema and high-altitude cerebral edema. Both conditions are potentially fatal and have been known to contribute to cardiac stress. Symptoms can include headache, dizziness, nausea, and extreme fatigue, which might not be immediately recognized by climbers as warning signs of a more serious underlying condition. The combination of hypoxia, cold stress, physical exertion, and potential altitude sickness creates a perfect storm for triggering heart attacks, especially in individuals who might have unknown pre-existing heart conditions or who may not manage their ascent cautiously. These factors likely contributed to the tragic outcomes for Eriko and the other 2 climbers found on Mount Fuji. Later autopsy reports confirmed that theory. There was no foul play involved. The deaths were solely the unfortunate result of natural causes under harsh environmental conditions. The finding ruled out any connection between the deaths of the 3 climbers, other than the shared fate that brought them to Mount Fuji outside of the official climbing season. While rescue teams were searching for Eriko, another heartbreaking event unfolded on Mount Fuji. Keita Kurakami, a well-known rock climber, was climbing with a friend along the Yoshida Trail. Tragically, he lost consciousness at the trail's 8th station. Despite immediate efforts to revive him, he was pronounced dead after being rushed to a nearby hospital. This incident raised the death toll on Mount Fuji to 4 in just 1 week, even though the climbing season hadn't even officially started yet. To put that in perspective, only 7 people lost their lives on Mount Fuji last year, which just goes to show that while climbing outside of the official season might sound cool, it's not really worth it. The trails are less maintained, and the lack of other climbers means fewer people are around to offer help if something goes wrong. The cold, snow-covered slopes make movement difficult and exhausting, which can be fatal if climbers are not adequately prepared. And while location tracking equipment like GPS can help locate climbers in distress, they are not foolproof. The effectiveness of these devices depends on various factors, including weather conditions, the climber's ability to activate them in an emergency, and the response time of rescue operations. In the case of Eriko and the other climbers, even with the right equipment, the outcomes were unfortunately tragic. For our next climber, it wasn't a decision to hike off-season or on a closed trail that would cost him his life. It was who he decided to trust. Bradley Thomas was known among his friends and family as an adventurous spirit with a deep love for nature. Born and raised in Springfield, Missouri, Brad had always felt a connection to the great outdoors. Whether it was hiking, fishing, or camping, he thrived in the natural world. Tragically, it was this love for adventure that led to his untimely death in 2022 in Buffalo National River, Arkansas. Buffalo National River, a pristine wilderness area in northern Arkansas, is a haven for outdoor enthusiasts. With its stunning bluffs, crystal-clear waters, and diverse wildlife, it offers a slice of untouched nature. However, the park's rugged terrain can be treacherous, and the National Park Service has strict regulations to ensure visitor safety. Guiding hikes within the park requires a special permit, a rule designed to protect both the guides and the hikers. Brad's tragic adventure began when he signed up for a hike led by Jeffrey Johnson, an unlicensed guide. Johnson, despite lacking the proper credentials, frequently organized hiking trips in the area. His expeditions were notorious for venturing off the beaten path, often into areas that were not well maintained or marked. Brad, unaware of the risks associated with an unlicensed guide, was excited about the prospect of exploring the less traveled parts of Buffalo National River. On that fateful day in May 2022, Brad and a small group of hikers set off on a trail that Johnson had promised would offer unparalleled views and an exhilarating experience. The hike was not sanctioned by the park authorities, making it illegal. Unlicensed guides like Johnson often skirted safety protocols, leading hikers into dangerous situations without proper preparation or emergency plans. Brad's adventurous spirit was both his greatest strength and, tragically, his undoing. The allure of the untamed and the thrill of discovery drove him to seek out experiences that others might avoid, a trait that ultimately led him to Jeffrey Johnson's ill-fated hike. As the group delved deeper into the park, the terrain became increasingly difficult to navigate. The path was steep and covered with loose rocks, making footing treacherous. Johnson, lacking the expertise of a licensed guide, failed to recognize the signs of impending danger. Without proper safety equipment or a clear plan, the group was ill-prepared for the challenges that lay ahead. Hours into the hike, disaster struck. Brad slipped on a loose rock, lost his balance, and fell off the trail into a ravine. The fall was severe, and he sustained multiple injuries on the way down, including a head wound that left him unconscious. The group, panicked and without the means to perform a rescue, struggled to reach him. Johnson's lack of proper training and equipment became painfully evident as he fumbled to coordinate a response. Without cell service and miles away from any help, the situation grew dire. One of the hikers managed to climb to a higher elevation to call for emergency services, but it was too late. By the time rescue teams arrived, Brad had succumbed to his injuries and tragically passed away in the ravine below the trail. Jeffrey Johnson was charged with multiple offenses, including operating without a license and negligence leading to death. The incident led to a crackdown on illegal guiding in Buffalo National River, with park authorities increasing patrols and imposing stricter penalties for those caught violating the rules. Brad's family set up a foundation in his name, dedicated to promoting outdoor safety and supporting rescue operations in national parks. They hope that through education and advocacy, they can prevent similar tragedies from happening to other adventurers. In some places, illegal climbing is outright punishable by fine and laws, even if you successfully reach the summit and return. For example, climbing a peak in Nepal without a permit is serious. Individual climbers who break the law are, at the very least, immediately deported and banned from Nepal for at least 2 years. Throughout the history of mountain climbing in the Himalayas, there have been cases of climbers venturing up peaks in Nepal without a permit, but these were mostly small teams with low budgets, aiming for adventurous climbs up difficult, new routes on isolated peaks, because without a paid permit, you don't get Sherpas, the indigenous Tibetan tribesmen who act as mountain guides. And without Sherpas, you don't get far. Not alive, anyways. But sadly, paying for a permit doesn't render you immune to the risks of dying on Everest, especially if you are attempting something really unconventional, like reaching Everest's peak without using any supplemental oxygen. Joshua Sherwayo Kirgi was an accomplished mountaineer from Kenya who was on a mission to conquer the highest point in the world. Joshua, originally from Nairobi, discovered his love for mountains in his teenage years, and his dedication to mountaineering saw him spend much of his youth exploring Kenya's peaks. Some of his personal records include scaling Mount Kenya, which is over 17,000 feet at its highest more than 20 times, including climbing it 3 times in a single day, while setting records along its challenging routes. While his passion for mountaineering burned brightly from a young age, it often had to be balanced against his career in corporate banking and his responsibilities as a family man. However, after establishing a successful career with Kenya Commercial Bank and building a family, his unquenchable thirst for climbing resurfaced. His prowess was not confined to Africa. He also explored the Rwenzori Mountains and tackled Mount Stanley. Known for his speed, Kirui notably ascended and descended Mount Kilimanjaro in just 15 hours, setting a significant personal record. In addition to mountaineering, Kirui competed in ultramarathons across the globe, including the Ultra Trail Chiang Mai in Thailand and the Cappadocia Ultra Trail in Turkey. 2023 marked a significant milestone in Kirui's climbing career, as he became the first African to summit Mount Manaslu, the world's 8th highest mountain, without supplemental oxygen. This was a testament to his incredible endurance and skill, but Kirui wasn't satisfied, and the thirst would cause him to set his sights on the tallest mountain in the world itself, Everest. Now, climbing Everest in itself wasn't altogether remarkable in Kirui's eyes, and so he wanted to commemorate this trip in a way never done before by an African. He would decide to make the trip to Everest with 7 summit treks. Now, if you're even somewhat active in the Everest community, you would have probably heard their name once or twice, as they're a pretty standard expedition team in charge of organizing expeditions that involving hikers from other countries, including the UK and Nepal. Kirui wanted to climb Mount Everest without the use of supplemental oxygen. Let me explain why this is special. At extreme altitudes, something above 21,000 feet, supplementary oxygen is used to prevent the effects of severe hypoxia, a condition in which not enough oxygen reaches the body's tissues. Although Mount Everest has been climbed without supplemental oxygen, 98% of summit climbers use their air backup once they hit 21,000 feet above sea level. But before embarking on the hike, Mr. Kirui had said that climbing with supplemental oxygen would not be a big challenge, and that is not what he wanted. The challenge for me would be without supplemental decent oxygen. Otherwise, I wouldn't feel like I've achieved much. So, I want to see how my body can cope in such an altitude, he said in an interview before his climb. Now, if Kirui had been successful, he would have entered a very special record. He would be the first African ever to successfully do so, something he himself acknowledged. So far, only 2% of Everest summits have been done without supplemental oxygen, with no African yet. Can we squeeze into this group? Let's see how it unfolds, he wrote in his blog. Now, a no-oxygen attempt involves special preparations and risks, something Kirui had come to fully appreciate when he started his journey in April. Physically, he was confident that his body was up to the challenge, well prepared through rigorous training and previous high-altitude experiences. Of course, Kirui would be climbing up Everest the same way as others. That is, from a route through Nepal and following the usual acclimatization schedule, which consisted of multiple trips on the mountain, each time reaching a higher point, spending some time at the higher altitude and then descending back to base camp to rest. On May 9, 2024, Kirui reported on his Instagram page that he and his fellow hikers had successfully made rotation number 2 in their quest to reach the Mount Everest summit. At this point, he was beginning to prepare to make a summit push. He was also very aware of the other risks associated with the expedition and prepared accordingly. He shared updates on his Instagram and Facebook, noting his precautions against the cold. He equipped himself with advanced gear, including a pair of heated gloves, heated mittens with a spare set of batteries, and 2 pairs of heated socks, also with spare batteries, ensuring multiple layers of protection against the severe cold. Medically, Kirui was proactive about the risks of altitude sickness, particularly high-altitude pulmonary edema, which he was susceptible to. HAPE, a serious condition that causes fluid to accumulate in the lungs, can be lethal if not treated promptly. He carried nifedipine to manage this risk. High-altitude cerebral edema, another severe altitude-related condition causing brain swelling and often a progression from acute mountain sickness, was another concern. To combat this, he was armed with medication. For emergencies, Kirui and his guide, Nawang Sherpa, had planned meticulously. Nawang was to carry an emergency oxygen bottle. Kirui had outlined clear triggers for its use. If I go lights out or if I go bananas, if I am time-barred, face unfavorable weather, or reach my body's limit when I realize I am no Superman. Traffic jam. His mountain trip would be pretty standard, and Kirui and his Sherpa would arrive at Bishop's Rock, a camping spot just below the summit, without incident. They would be preparing for the final summit push, and this is where the details get a little fuzzy. Kirui and Nawang Sherpa set out from Camp 4, with the aim of reaching the summit. Their final moments were fraught with difficulty. Their last known position was near the South Col, just a few hundred feet below the summit, and at this point Kirui was exhibiting abnormal behavior. He refused to descend, and also refused to use the bottled oxygen reserved for emergencies, according to Mingma Sherpa, chairman of 7 Summit Treks. Despite his backup plan to use his oxygen in case of emergency, or if he went bananas, when the time came, he wouldn't do it. This decision would cost him his life. They lost radio communication with base camp soon after that, and the ensuing silence was ominous. The emergency search and rescue team dispatched from Camp 4 found it difficult to trace their steps due to the extremely challenging weather conditions, so close to the summit. Days later, the worst was confirmed. Joshua Cherwiot Karuk and Nawang Sherpa had died on the mountain. The team found Kirui's body in a crevasse, just about 160 feet below the summit, just a whisker away from achieving his goal. The exact circumstances of his death remained unclear, but it was evident that the harsh conditions, combined with his refusal to use supplemental oxygen in critical moments, had contributed to the tragedy. Nawang Sherpa sadly was never found, and it is presumed that he also fell victim to the perilous conditions on Everest while trying to help save his client. What makes this story particularly heart-wrenching was Kirui's determination to reach the summit despite the deteriorating conditions. The extreme altitude, severe weather, and low oxygen levels created a deadly combination. The decision to press on, ignoring the risks, led to a tragic outcome. Everest's deadly allure continues to draw climbers, reminding us of the mountain's unforgiving nature. Any climber, no matter how experienced, can fall victim to unexpected obstacles. Our last story is a devastating masterclass in the sheer loss of life that can happen when you make one bad decision. On May 25, 2019, a group of 8 seasoned climbers led by British mountaineer Martin Moran gathered at the base of Nanda Devi, India's second highest peak. Standing at over 21,000 feet, this mountain is renowned not just for its breathtaking height but also for its formidable terrain and unpredictable weather conditions. Nanda Devi and its sister mountain, Nanda Devi East, are among the world's most challenging peaks, and only a handful of people have climbed them. And these climbers had one daring ambition: to be part of that exclusive list. Scaling such extreme peaks was not a new experience for Martin. His mountaineering career was marked by notable achievements and ambitious climbs. During the winter of 1984-85, he became the first person to climb all the Scottish mountains listed as Munros during a single winter trip, covering 277 peaks over 83 days. His ventures continued when he qualified as a professional mountain guide in 1985. In the summer of 1993, Moran and his climbing partner Simon Jenkins achieved another remarkable feat by climbing all 75 summits in the Alps over 4,000 meters in height, traveling between them on foot or by bicycle, without any motorized transport. This experience was also chronicled in one of Moran's books. His experiences were not confined to Europe alone. Moran made numerous first ascents in the Indian Himalayas. These included the south face of Nanda Khat in 1995 and the west ridge of Nilkanth in 2000. By 2016, he had led multiple expeditions in the region, exploring peaks like Kamet and Trisul, which made his reputation as an accomplished mountaineer even more impressive. Moran's deep commitment and respect for high-altitude climbing is part of what made his illegal 2019 expedition to Nanda Devi even more surprising. This venture, unfortunately, would test the limits of even the most experienced climbers, challenging their skills against one of the most unforgiving environments on the planet. Moran, accompanied by 3 other Britons, 2 Americans, an Australian, and an Indian, had secured permission to climb Nanda Devi East, a challenging but legally accessible route. However, driven by the allure of uncharted territory, they secretly harbored a more ambitious plan. Climbing a monumental peak usually goes something like this. You arrive at a camp at the base of the mountain, usually charged with anticipation and nerves. The air is usually crisp, with awe-inspiring scenery and a palpable sense of camaraderie among the team. Climbers spend days, sometimes weeks, acclimatizing to the altitude, reviewing the routes they will take to climb the mountains to get to the next base camp higher up the summit, and adjusting their plans based on weather conditions and physical readiness. It's a period of intense preparation, where every detail counts and safety checks are paramount. Once you're ready, the climb begins. It's a gradual process, often starting in the dark, early morning hours to take advantage of stable, cold temperatures, which keep the snow well frozen, reducing the risk of avalanches. The climb is physically demanding and mentally taxing. Each step up the steep, icy slopes requires a mix of strength, endurance, and technique. Climbers face thin air, fierce winds, and shifting weather, which can turn from sunny to stormy in moments, dramatically increasing the danger. For Moran and his team, however, this climb was not going to follow the typical pattern. As they reached their second base camp, Moran revealed on Facebook that they intended to conquer an unclimbed peak, standing at an imposing 21,300 feet. This peak, located near Nanda Devi, but not included in their initial permit, represented a formidable challenge and a tempting notch on any climber's belt. The allure of setting foot where no one had before was irresistible, but it came with significant risks. Moran's team had officially been granted permission to scale Nanda Devi East, alongside a group of 4 other climbers. However, unknown to the authorities, they harbored ambitions that stretched beyond the permissible boundaries. The challenge of this unexplored peak appealed to them. But it was a risky decision. Unexplored peaks are, after all, unexplored for a reason. Nanda Devi East was known amongst locals for its unpredictable weather and difficult rocky terrain, making it a formidable challenge even for seasoned climbers. And so, without notifying the authorities, Moran and his team ventured into an area with no prior data on weather patterns, terrain stability, or avalanche risks. Climbing an untested path meant that every step was a gamble, and the consequences of a misstep could be dire. And as it turned out, it was. On May 26th, just a day after their last communication, heavy snow began to fall. But this was no ordinary snowfall. It was relentless and intense, and it quickly blanketed the mountain in a thick layer of snow. The temperature dropped sharply, and visibility was reduced to almost nothing as the wind howled through the peaks, whipping the snow into blinding white curtains. The team's progress slowed to a crawl. Each step through the deepening snow was an effort, their heavy gear weighing them down even more. The snow piled up around them, making it difficult to see the path ahead. The climbers had to constantly dig their way through drifts, using their ice axes and poles to navigate the increasingly treacherous terrain. The cold seeped through their clothes, chilling them to the bone despite their thermal gear. Then, without warning, the avalanche began. They were climbing along, putting one foot in front of the other on their exciting adventure. But the heavy snow from the storm had destabilized the slopes, causing massive amounts of snow and ice to break loose. A sudden crack split the air, and the avalanche was sudden and ferocious, cascading down the mountainside with unstoppable force. The roar of the falling snow was deafening, drowning out all other sounds and signaling imminent danger. Caught in this violent natural assault, the climbers had little time to react. Some might have tried to find shelter behind rocks or in corners, but the sheer volume and speed of the avalanches were overwhelming. The snow swept down with such force that it could uproot boulders and trees, and anything in its path stood little chance. No one quite knows the exact details of events that followed, but the outcome was tragic. It's likely that some of the climbers were immediately swept away by the avalanches, buried under tons of snow and debris. The power of the avalanche was such that it could crush and suffocate anyone caught in them. Others may have been thrown against rocks or down steep slopes as they suffered fatal injuries from the impact. For those who might have initially survived, the extreme cold and lack of oxygen under the snow would have made survival nearly impossible. When the climbers failed to return or communicate, concern quickly turned into alarm. After the 8-person group failed to return to base camp on May 26th, the authorities were alerted on May 31st, and a massive search and rescue operation was launched. The Indian Air Force and the Indo-Tibetan Border Police were quickly called into action. These were highly skilled teams with experience in high-altitude rescues, but the conditions they faced on Nanda Devi were some of the harshest imaginable. The weather remained brutal, with heavy snow still falling and fierce winds whipping through the peaks. Visibility was poor, and the risk of further avalanches was ever present. The first searches were done using special helicopters that can fly high in the mountains. These helicopters took off from Munsiari village in Uttarakhand. The pilots and crews had to deal with rough winds and freezing temperatures. Every flight was dangerous, with the pilots knowing that the mountain's weather could change suddenly. They had to fly through narrow passes and over dangerous terrain, always looking for any signs of the missing climbers. From the air, they saw a sad sight. 5 bodies scattered on the slopes, partially buried in the snow with 3 more missing. The bright colors of the climbers' gear stood out against the white snow, showing that the worst fears were true. These pictures confirmed that the climbers had indeed passed away. A military source said the climbers may have fallen from an ice ridge or an overhanging mass of snow during the avalanches. There must have been some error of judgment, and they must have fallen from a great height along with the entire snow cornice. It must have been like falling from a 10-story building, the source mentioned. They took a different route for which they didn't have permission. It is their adventurism which cost them their lives, the source said. The reality is that mountains like Nanda Devi are incredibly dangerous, and any small mistake can have huge consequences. And these climbers knew that. They were experienced. They knew the risks, and that nature is unpredictable and doesn't always give second chances. And still, they chose to push the boundaries. The mission to actually recover their bodies was even more challenging. The bodies were located in a very harsh side of the mountain with steep slopes and deep snow, making a recovery plan tough. The rescue teams, made up of experienced military mountaineers and special rescue workers, had to plan every move carefully to avoid causing more avalanches. They knew that one wrong step could not only mess up the mission, but also put their own lives at risk. Ground teams were sent out, each member equipped with the gear needed to survive at high altitudes. They spent a couple days getting used to the weather, a process that usually takes 6 to 8 days. This was crucial, so they could work well in such high and extreme conditions. They had to be ready for long, hard days on the mountain, moving through the deep snow and tricky paths. The constant threat of more avalanches was always there, reminding them how unpredictable the mountain could be. In addition to the ground efforts, drones were used to scan the area and give real-time data to the rescue teams, and these drones helped find the best routes and locate the bodies more precisely, making the difficult job a bit easier. In the end, the bodies of 7 climbers were recovered alongside a GoPro camera that showed the exact moments before the tragedy. However, British climber Martin Moran remains missing, a tragic end to one of the most celebrated mountaineers who took one adventure sadly too far. While the thrill of adventure is undeniable, it's crucial to respect the power of nature and the laws designed to protect us. Illegal climbs not only endanger the climbers, but also put rescuers at risk. These stories serve as sobering reminders of the importance of preparation, caution, and respect for the natural world. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay bold and live brave.